is a Dragon Blazer production. Coming down the aisle, the podcast tag team champions of the world, the Rage and Blaze Show.
It's time for another exciting episode of the Rage
and Blaze Show.
Okay, so today we are going to be revisiting WrestleMania 3. March 29th, 1987. This is the big one. This is the one where Hulk Hogan power slams or body slams Andre the Giant. So, I mean, I'm really excited to see this one again.
And then there's also the fact that Ricky the Dragon Steamboat faces Macho Man in what many consider the greatest match of all time.
Well, we'll be the judge of that at the end of this episode. Now, this is another 3-hour WrestleMania, so this will probably be another 2-part episode.
Yeah, we're probably going to stick to the 2-part format for these 3-hour long episodes.
Yeah, when we start getting into more 2.5 hour pay-per-views, we'll probably go back to the one episode for a pay-per-view format. But until then, we'll have to break these up. We don't want overly long podcasts being released.
We'd like to keep these around an hour long.
So, we've got another exciting thing today on the show. We get to have our first guest ever.
First guest ever, and who is that, Rage?
It's Warren Rayberg, who is the owner, operator, founder of Ohio Nerd.
That's right. He goes to toy shows and checks out a lot of toys. We're going to be talking about toys later in the show.
Yeah, he buys, sells. He's everything to do with toys. And one thing he does is he can get a hold of WWF action figures for you.
Yeah, I was... I don't know about you, but, well, I do know about you. I grew up with you. We had a lot of wrestling toys when we were kids. We had the wrestling ring, and I believe my favorite toy was this Ultimate Warrior toy I had when I was younger.
Had the little thumb things that you just kind of push down and then launch them off the top rope.
Oh, yeah, that was always fun.
But we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. We want to leave the toy talk with Warren. So later in our show, he will be joining us. Okay, so we've already started this WrestleMania 3, and you can tell it is massive. Dear Lord, 93,173 people in attendance. This is the biggest WrestleMania, and it held the record up until 2016 when WrestleMania 32 was held at AT&T Stadium and beat out the record attendance. But this was the largest attended WrestleMania for, I mean, what is that? 30 years? 33 years? No.
That's a long time. That's huge.
So, yeah, just about 30 years, maybe actually 29 years to be exact. So, I mean, this you can tell, it's at the Pontiac Silverdome. It's beautiful. It is just massive, and you can just tell already they traded 3 different cities with 3 small venues for this
massive venue. And we'll see if we get entrances this time, but it's kind of starting to feel
like
more
WrestleMania.
Like WrestleMania, isn't it?
Definitely.
Although the music the music this time sounded kind of like a 80s sitcom where your wacky neighbor's gonna rush into that door and his name's gonna pop up on the screen.
I'll tell you what, though, they used some weird retro musical instrument. You ever heard of the thing called the saxophone?
I have. I think that's an instrument.
I'll tell you what, I haven't heard the saxophone in years, and I believe we got to hear it at the beginning of this opening.
I mean, I've heard it every time I watch The Simpsons.
Oh, is that so? So anyhow, So this show starts off with Vince McMahon welcoming everybody to Wrestlemania, you know, the way he does. And then you get him announcing the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin.
Yeah, this is by far the best musical guest to do it was America the Beautiful, not the national anthem.
Yeah, this is America the Beautiful she performs on a piano right there next to the wrestling ring.
Aretha kills it.
This is just starting to feel like the WrestleManias we know and love today. I mean, this was 30 years ago, and you can already feel the scale, and it's just amazing. So then
I just hope I get entrances.
I got a feeling we're going to starting in this one. Like,
I hope so.
On more of a consistent basis, we hope. Who knows? They might still leave people in the ring, and we'll see what we get. But
I want even shitty wrestlers like the Executioner to get an entrance in this one.
I think the Executioner's on the unemployment line.
I'm hoping he got executed.
Yeah, I don't think he's. We haven't heard from him in the last WrestleMania. So
yeah.
Okay, so then they move on to Jesse the Body Ventura and Gorilla Monsoon, and they're going to introduce some guest commentators for the show. We've got Bob Uecker, Mr. Baseball. He was MLB player, won the World Series with the St. Louis Cardinals in 1964. He was also the voice of the Cleveland Indians in the Major League Baseball trilogy movies, the comedies with Charlie Sheen. Those were some great movies.
Never watched it.
Wait. This is a wrestling podcast, so we'll just leave this at wrestling. But what?
I've never seen them.
You've never seen the Major League?
The first one when I was a kid, but it's been a long time.
Okay, well, there's plenty of streaming platforms out there. We'll have to look for it, and you'll have to watch that.
Oh, on this wrestling podcast, we should watch Major League Baseball?
Absolutely not during the podcast. Do it on your own time. So anyhow, so then they announce the other special guest, which is Mary Hart, longtime host of Entertainment Tonight.
Never really watched much of that either.
I'm sure if you'd seen her, you know, a little bit older than what she is here, I'm sure you'd recognize her because she was on TV for Entertainment Tonight for probably 30 years.
I'm sure I've watched an episode or two. It's just not really my bag.
So already a couple minutes into the show, we're already getting celebrities, which is a long-standing tradition of WrestleMania. We've already got a musical performance and 2 celebrities already. Okay, so the first match of WrestleMania 3 is a tag team match against the Can-Am Connection with Rick Martel and Tom Zenk, and it is against the Cowboy Bob Orton and the Magnificent Morocco with Mr. Fuji in their corner. Now, we remember Rick Martel a little bit down the road. He's going to become the model Rick Martel. Now, Tom Zenk kind of got lost in history.
No idea.
Yeah, no clue. I even looked him up. Looks like he only spent about 2 years in the WWF, probably as a part of the Can-Am Connection, and that was kind of history for him.
This is the highlight of his life.
Yeah, this is definitely the one he tells his grandchildren. So, well, that's if he got a woman that could give him kids to begin with. Anyhow, so anyhow, we're a little disappointed here, aren't we? Why are we disappointed at the beginning of this match?
I still don't have entrances.
No entrances. Both teams were standing in the ring. They just announced both teams while they're standing there. They kind of give a fist bump to the crowd, and the match is about to begin. And that's about all we get at the beginning of this match.
No music, no walking down the aisle. They're just already there. This is like a pre-show match.
So hopefully we'll get some more entrances. We definitely enjoy those. But this was a pretty good tag team match, a little bit of back and forth. You could tell the Can-Am Connection was a tag team, and they were working in sync, where the Cowboy Bob Orton and the Magnificent Morocco was a little out of sorts. There was a moment where Morocco punched Cowboy Bob Orton accidentally, and then later on he hits him again, or there were just some disconnect between those two.
I feel bad for poor 8-year-old Randy having to watch his dad go through all that.
And he was probably sitting right in the front row watching his daddy get his butt kicked.
Yeah, perhaps.
That would be kind of interesting to see if 8-year-old Randy's out there in the crowd. We'll have to keep an eye on him, see if we can find him.
I wonder if he's still hearing voices yet.
So anyhow, the Can-Am Connection wins this one with the nice little tag team move, cross body with
Morocco
a trip.
just tripped over him. I felt bad for Morocco. Those guys, he shouldn't have been in the ring.
Yeah, well, the referee let it go. He announced him as the winner at the end, and that was the decision, so it's time to move on.
All right.
Okay, so before we get the next match, they end up giving us a little video package of what's been happening, like probably Saturday Night Main Event it looked like, between Billy Jack Hayes versus Hercules with Bobby the Brain Heenan. So they show a little footage at Saturday Night Main Event where they're beating each other up. They're trying to, I guess, get the full Nelson on them. So this is being billed as like the full Nelson match. Even though it's a regular singles match.
It's a grudge match.
It's a grudge match, and both of these guys have the same finishing move, which is the full Nelson. We get a interview with Hercules, who we'd like to point out is now billed as Hercules, not Hercules Hernandez.
I didn't realize that we had a demigod in the ring when we were watching last episode.
Yeah, he points out during the interview that apparently he's at least 1,000 years old.
Yeah, because he's Hercules. Actually, though, Hercules would have been around a lot longer than 1,000 years old. Our Hercules...
Are you calling him a liar?
I'm saying that he got his time a little off.
Okay.
Well, that would be 1,000, or, 980, 1,000 years ago. Hercules was around before, or in BC. So, I mean, it would have been a long, long time ago. And I mean a long time.
I mean a long time ago. Okay, so, guess what we finally get in this WrestleMania?
What's that?
Entrances!
Yeah!
But,
no,
I got bad news. Yeah, I was gonna say, I got bad news. No music. But we get some of my favorite entrances of all time. We get the little go-kart and the little mini ring drove out to the ring. I love these entrances. Absolutely love them. I really wish they'd bring them back, because how cool are those little mini rings that they come out of? I want one. Where can I get one?
Check Amazon.
You know what? Amazon has everything.
Everything. Mini rings that take you out to a ring, Amazon.
I'm going to get on Amazon as soon as we're done with the show.
You know what I want before those mini rings?
What's that?
An actual ring.
An actual ring? I don't know if I can convince my wife to get an actual ring for the backyard, but maybe a go-kart shaped as a ring.
You think you have a better chance?
I've got to, right? It won't take up as much space.
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to move on to this match. This is a pretty good back-and-forth strongman match is the best way I can describe it. Brute strength, back and forth. We had a pretty vicious clothesline during this match.
By Hercules.
Yep, and then we get Hercules gets his chance at the full Nelson, and Hercules holds on to it for a while, and we get the whole classic wrestling power move where, you know, the
shaking of the arms.
Yeah, the shaking of the arms by Billy Jack Haynes. He kind of does the whole Superman, you know, pump up, get the crowd to cheer, and he breaks out of it. So then it's his turn. He gets the full Nelson on to Hercules. They end up falling out of the ring. He gets the lock on again, and as he's holding on to it, they end up counting to 10, and they both get counted out. And right when they get counted out, that Bobby the Brain Heenan gets himself involved and decides to kick Billy in the back.
See, I have thoughts on that. See, Bobby the Brain Heenan was mad, just like all of us was mad. He should have bowed down and realized that he's facing a demigod. He is facing Hercules of legend. He should have just bowed down, and he didn't. He disrespected Hercules. So Bobby the Brain Heenan was just mad.
Well, Billy Jack obviously was not happy about getting kicked.
Shot.
He wasn't happy about getting kicked, so he goes chasing after Bobby the Brain Heenan. Hercules eventually catches up to him and wraps that chain, that silver chain he comes down the aisle with, and he punches Billy Jack right in the forehead.
I'm willing to bet that chain was magical.
Oh, it must have been because...
His dad is Zeus, you know that.
Because he had blood pouring down his face. This is probably the bloodiest... Well, yeah, I'd say this was bloodier than King Kong Bundy in WrestleMania 2.
Yeah, it was pretty bloody.
So this is probably the bloodiest we've seen so far in a WrestleMania. I mean, King Kong kind of bled a little and it went around his eyes and stuff, but Billy Jack was busted open. His whole face was kind of covered in blood. So this is about the bloodiest we've seen in a WrestleMania so far.
It should have been bloodier if you're facing a demigod.
Now keep in mind the match was already over when all this took place. They ended up calling this a double countout. So no winner in this second match of WrestleMania 3.
Yeah, this is, I believe, our second double countout of the WrestleManias we've watched.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, so we're going to move on to the next match. Okay, so before we move on to the next match, we're going to introduce our first guest on the Rage and Blaze show. His name is Warren Rayberg. He's coming down at 6'8". This man is a monster. How you doing there? You're known in your circles, Ohio Nerd, right?
That's right, guys. We are here, the Ohio Nerd, bringing it to you, bringing you all the pain, all the toys, all the collectible goodness, right here to the Rage and Blade show. We are bringing all the knowledge of wrestling goodies and the toys. The impact will be felt for generations to come.
Okay, so Warren, or do you want to be known as Ohio Nerd on here?
That's what I go by on the social media. As you guys all may know me already from my YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. You could see me out at the toy shows. If you collect wrestling figures or memorabilia, you might have ran into me if you're from the Ohio area or even around. I travel across this country hunting for all the toys.
So you're considered somewhat of an expert on toys, right?
I don't know about expert. But definitely, toys are my expertise. There's people, I'm 22 years old, so vintage toys is a passion of mine through being what I grew up playing with. I play with modern toys too, but I grew up playing with hand-me-downs, going to garage sales and flea markets. So, for instance, my first wrestling toys were the vibrating figures from San Francisco Toy Makers. They had the license to, I want to say, WCW at the time.
Yeah.
And so they were producing those, and I got those at a flea market because it was cool, because it was a toy, it would vibrate and, fight people, and I thought that was just super cool. That's why I picked it up. Because growing up, I wasn't allowed to watch a lot of wrestling. My parents were very conservative on the things I could watch. I wasn't allowed to watch SpongeBob, and, wrestling was basically people beating the crap out of each other. But it's just so cool because they are real-life superheroes.
Absolutely, they are. And when you were growing up, wrestling was in the Attitude Era, so it was really kind of raunchy when you were a little kid, right? Well, you've never really been
past the Attitude
never really
Era.
been little.
Attitude Era is really important. I mean, it really saved WWE. It really brought them out on top. They won the Monday Night Wars with that era. But I was a little bit after. When I remember, it was, John Cena was huge. We had The Undertaker. You had the Hardy Brothers. That was really when I was growing up.
So it was kind of in the transition stage, Attitude into the kind of the PG era.
Actually, after the Attitude Era, I believe was called the Ruthless Aggression Era.
So is that about the time you were a
Yeah,
kid?
that'd be about the time. I think the Attitude Era is really what soured it for my parents, is just because
I'm sure.
they didn't want me walking in and just telling my teacher to suck it.
Yeah, and, there was a lot of T-shirts going around, and you had Stone Cold flipping his boss off, so I can see where parents might have shied against you watching that.
Yeah, but really where I got into wrestling was the toys, just because they're so much fun, and they have such a rich history. If you guys know anything about the toy history of wrestling figures, WWF, when they were first starting out, Remco approached them and offered them $10,000 for the license, and Vince was loving it up. He said that. But Galoob, they also wanted the license, so they offered $25,000 for the license. So they over doubled it, and there was that. But the really cool thing was, Vince wasn't sure about Galoob being the company. Galoob was a smaller company at the time. They hadn't, been well as established as Remco. Remco made everything knockoff wise. They had a bunch of toys, but they were well established. Galoob was kind of not as well established. So they said, why don't you call Universal and ask them how we did, because they had just got done making the successful toy line for the A-Team Galoob had. So they were like, ask Universal to give us a plug. Say, hey, they'll back us up, give us a recommendation. So Vince called Universal, and little did the Galoob know, Universal had just bought LJN Toys. They were now the parent company of LJN. So when Vince called up to say, hey, what do you think of this? They said, you shouldn't have them do it, let us do it. We'll have LJN do it. And LJN put in a bigger bid, and they got it because they offered $200,000 for the license. And Vince, being actually a good man in this situation, went back to Galoob and said, you can have it if you can match their offer. And Galoob being a smaller company, they couldn't match Universal and LJN's $200,000 offer.
So then history was made, and those are probably the toys we grew up knowing and loving.
The LJN were the big rubbery figures, if you know anything about them. And the reason they became the big size, they were originally designed to be smaller, scaled down to the bendable figures. So if there was also a bendable line, it was way less popular than the superstars, the big rubbery ones. But when they pitched them, they pitched with a scale-up version, so that'd be easier to pitch. And the people pitching it never told the toy stores that they were making it smaller. And the toy stores loved it because not only did they have real-life superheroes, they had toys that were larger than life. They had these big things that you could battle around and beat each other. They were really playable. And I know everyone out there listening right now, if you're in that age group that grew up with these toys, you know how much fun they were. You could throw them around. They had weight to them. They would bounce around. And they were just a lot of fun to play with. And those was the LJN era. And you got to think, LJN made some great toys. They had Thundercats. They had Michael Jackson toys, Rambo, E.T., Knight Rider. It was just great. So they did that, and then Remco, going back to that first company we talked about here, they weren't going to lay down, so they went out, and they're really known for riding on the coattails. So if you guys know He-Man, the Masters of the Universe,
of course,
that has a really good crossover with you wrestling fans for He-Man.
I think they just recently, within the last couple years, did a crossover He-Man WWE wrestling line.
And those figures are absolutely great. They had Macho Man in there. They had Ultimate Warrior.
I remember
Sting. Sting. They had John Cena. They had Roman Reigns. That's such a great toy line. So to go back to that, guys, Remco, that first line we talked about, they didn't go laying down. They went out and got the license to a much smaller company, AWA Wrestling. And at that time, that was before Ric Flair had joined the WWF. So Ric Flair was made into a figure by Remco at that time. So you have really the big giants, LJN, those figures that everyone loves. And you had Remco at the exact same time making wrestling figures. So those are really the vintage era about when WrestleMania 3 here. Those would have been the options for everyone to play with. They could have played with those big rubbery LJN figures or that line. They had like some thumb wrestlers and they had some bendables. Or they could have went with the Remco. Remco was a little bit cheaper line and played with those and had people like Ric Flair to play with.
Yeah, we played with some of them rubber figures growing up with our stepbrother. I think he had some of those. But we're more familiar with the early 90s action figures. Now, who was that?
That would have been Jakks Pacific that you guys played with. And they were actually one of the first companies with these wrestling figures that introduced in 3D face scanning. Really in the middle 90s is when it became affordable to do 3D face scans. And that's really when their figures kind of started to take off. They were making figures of a bunch of people. It was really good. And they made a really successful toy line. They made some of my favorites. They made, in my personal favorite, one of the wrestlers is they made a great DDP figure who would actually strike the DDP pose when you like.
Oh, I remember that. Had a little thing that it brings it down.
It was
little
great.
Button. Yeah, that was awesome.
DDP.
But yeah, so like that would have been your guys' era, and then they had the license on for until 2006, and then Mattel picked it up in 2010, and Mattel for the first time then. They've made every figure in scale with each other with their line, with their elites, and that is really the evolution we've come through. We start off with big rubbery figures that were great to play with, great playability, but they really lack that facial detail. They lack that accuracy, but they were just such great figures to play with. To now, we have these figures that are such great collectibles. They have great 3D face scans that look so real. They're even 3D face printing the figures now if you go into the stores, and everything's in scale with each other. And it's just the evolution of figures has been amazing with wrestling.
I remember having a Hulk Hogan figure where his arms were kind of flat, and you could lift him up, and you could put another figure on him, and he would spring load, and he would throw the other.
Figures,
yeah, it was spring loaded, and he would throw the other figures. I always remember loving playing with those figures.
That would have most likely been a Hasbro figure. So after LJN would lose the license due to basically a hostile takeover of LJN, they lost a lot of their toys, and that would then go on. Hasbro would pick up the license. Hasbro didn't carry the license very long. They picked it up towards the end of WWF's big heyday, and they actually just chose not to renew the license just because they weren't making as much money. But that figure with that action would have been a Hasbro WWF figure.
Yeah, we absolutely loved playing with those as a kid. We had the big blue wrestling ring that came with the figures and everything.
Yeah.
And it just brings back tons of childhood memories.
That blue wrestling ring actually is a great piece of toy history. So the original rings that they had, nowadays if you look at them, they're designed different. They're not as durable, those posts. There's actually record of a kid fell on one of the wrestling ring posts in his chest, and he died, had to take the hospital from internal bleeding. The post was so durable and so strong that a kid falling on it, it would puncture all the way through. So yeah, that's like a big piece in toy history.
Boy.
Yeah, there's people out there who just collect toys that have been recalled, and that is like a big piece of history.
Murder toys, that's good.
Oh, no, not just like that. Like, there's a Tarzan figure that makes obscene motions when you poke his action.
Oh, wow.
I can only imagine that.
This show just got dirty.
There's like a Punisher toy that like transforms into like a missile, but the missile comes out of his private area.
Okay, listeners, we're going to stick to the wrestling now.
Yeah, but that wrestling ring, guys, that's like actually a big part of toy history.
That's actually interesting. I never heard this story. We survived our childhood with this dangerous wrestling ring we had in our bedroom.
We're survivors.
We definitely
Here at the
are.
Rage and Blaze show, we are survivors.
So anyhow, we're glad you're on the show. How would you like to finish watching WrestleMania 3 with us and get your reaction?
Oh man, has Andre went on yet?
He is the main event. He will be the last match. He's taking on the immortal Hulk Hogan.
Absolutely, guys. We're going to stay here, say our prayers, eat our vitamins, and finish watching WrestleMania 3.
Yeah, brother. All right, here we go. We're going to move on to the next match. Okay, so now we're going to get an interview with King Kong Bundy and his little partners. And after that, we get another interview with Hillbilly Jim and his little partners. So what we have coming up is a 6-man mixed tag match. So if anybody who's ever watched wrestling knows that a mixed tag match is traditionally mostly men and women in matches, and the women have to fight the women, the men have to fight the men. But in this case, it's a 6-man mixed tag match, and there's 2 little people on each team, and there's a big guy, and the little people are supposed to wrestle the little people, and the big guy's supposed to wrestle the big guy. So here we got Hillbilly Jim with Haiti Kid and the Little Beaver. I'm not making this up, guys. Go watch it. And then we've got King Kong Bundy and his partners Little Tokyo and Lord Littlebrook.
Oh, geez, these names.
Yeah,
they're a bit uncomfortable.
Obviously, this is the time. This is the time in which we get a little bit of a comedy segment in the show. This isn't really meant to be, one of the big matches. This is just kind of a break from the action, and we get a little bit of laughter in the room.
And you guys have to consider with this, we don't condone the imagery or messaging from this. This is a long time ago.
Obviously, this is 30-plus years old, and it's... They use some words during this match that's not really accepted. They use symbols that
we don't agree with. They don't represent our thoughts or beliefs. So just make sure everyone know that we're very clear it's separate.
Yes,
very. And also, guys, pay attention. On a more positive note, you guys watch these promos in between before the match. We just got done talking about those LJN figures, and a little boy held up a Macho Man LJN figure. So that's pretty cool.
That was cool. It was
perfect timing.
It was literally right after we just had the conversation. So. How perfect was that? So anyhow, we're going to get into this match, and it starts off with the little people, and they do their thing, and you get some bouncing around the ropes and collisions, and then you get the little
body slams too, man. Like they had some high quality wrestling they put on.
It was fun.
They were pretty good. Yeah.
So then you get the little bit. If anybody ever watched a kind of a comedy wrestling segment, they do the row where it looks like they're rowing a boat with the legs. So we get that little move going on. Then we get King Kong Bundy gets tagged in, and he obviously looks like he's wanting to take on one of the little guys, but Hillbilly Jim comes in, and he kind of saves the day. So then they wrestle for a few minutes until finally the little guys get back in, and King Kong Bundy gets himself disqualified by taking his whole body weight and doing a... move on one of the little people.
It was a power slam.
Yeah, like he just threw himself on. Guys, it was clear what happened. Bundy's just not used to having that much beaver, and he saw it, got overwhelmed, and fell right down on it.
Oh.
Wow.
I can't even condone the actions of King Kong Bundy. He just slammed down a guy 3 times smaller than him.
Yeah, but that guy was wrestling his butt off. And that same beaver guy, you have to keep in mind, he didn't even back out of that ring. When Paul Bundy tapped in, he stood in there, went between his legs, did a belly kick on him, flying jump kick. It was amazing. That guy did not put up with Bundy, and Bundy wasn't going to put up with that guy.
He was brave, and so, did he deserve it?
I think it was, Bundy basically said, you want to wrestle with me, I'll wrestle with you. I don't know if he should have been disqualified.
Well, he got disqualified, so the winners of this match is Hillbilly Jim, Little Beaver, and the Haiti Kid.
Oh, jeez. I'm so glad we're done with this match.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, he might not have got disqualified if he was a bigger beaver.
Nope.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to the comedy segment, and we're gonna check out the next match.
But first, we got a word from our sponsor.